Rick Revel, Mr. History, brought to you in part by Dixie Gun Works in Union City, Tennessee. On our last episode of History Highway, we traveled down to Columbia, Tennessee to visit the National Confederate Museum. Located on the grounds of the historic antebellum home known as Elm Springs, the museum is full of historical items. Our tour guides of the museum are the Kennedy twins, Ron and Donnie, who are experts on Southern heritage. In part 2, the Kennedy twins are going to pick up where they left off and tell us about Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the artillery guns from the Virginia Military Institute that were used at the First Battle of Manassas. One, two, three. We're gonna drive in every day, and somewhere along the way, there's a road sign with a story from the past. History is everywhere, and I'm gonna take you there. So buckle up tight, we're going there real fast. So take a ride down the history highway. We're headed right to the days of old. So take a ride down the history highway. I got the pedal to the metal and I'm letting this Chevy roll. It doesn't matter if you're a reenactor who loves the smell of black powder in the morning on the battlefield, or a collector who admires the craftsmanship of a well-made weapon of old. Dixie Gun Works has a Pedersoli just for you. And not only does Dixie Gun Works have a warehouse full of Pedersoli reproduction firearms, they have an incredible collection of antique firearms. Inside the pages of their huge catalog, you will find gun parts, shooting accessories, reenactor clothing, camping supplies, and even some big guns if you like to burn a lot of powder. Dixie Gun Works is located in Union City, Tennessee. But for your convenience, visit our online store at www.dixiegunworks.com or call 1-800-238-6785. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John.
Yes, sir.
I love it.
This is the gospel of the Old South right here. What we have here is another one of the many unique pieces of Southern history that we have in our museum here. These are the original gun carriage for one of the
wheels.
The wheels itself
one on the
came
carriage.
on the gun carriage for Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Now, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John were 4 artillery pieces that was given to VMI well before the war, and actually an Episcopal priest, Pendleton was his name. He was the one that named these guns Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, of course, after the gospel. So these guns were used by the Rockbridge Artillery, VMI cadets, and I think Stonewall Jackson had something to do with that history. And it was used in many battles, including, I believe, Manassas, First Manassas. But these guns was collected by the Sons of Confederate Veterans, and we're just proud to, these gun carriage wheels.
There you go.
We're just very proud to have them here because it's part of American history. And again, we would like to stress, we are talking about American history. Southern history is part of American history, and we have a lot of it here.
And one of the things that we kind of pointed out yesterday, and I'm going to kind of, we'll do a little cutaway shot so you can see it. But if you'll notice, Stonewall Jackson's wearing Union colors.
Correct.
And that's because at that time, being a teacher, being over the students at VMI, he was doing that for the United States at the time. Of course, it was a state-run militia, but the thought was to be part of the United States.
And during the Mexican War, remember that
He
was
was.
the uniform he wore.
Yes, that's very correct.
Many Confederate units wore blue. In Minden, Louisiana, there was a Minden blue.
That's right.
So, and I think Bernard B. at the First Battle of Manassas, he had a blue uniform on. People see a picture of him and think he's a Yankee, but no, he was a Southern.
And some of the Louisiana groups, one of them, I think it might have been the 16th, but it might have been the 6th. I think it was the 6th. They were under Gibson, I believe, and they wind up, because of having blue uniforms, friendly fire. They got fired upon because they... Also, so that caused problems sometimes.
The Wisconsin troops wore gray uniform. Guess what happened?
Friendly fire.
Blue-coated friends shot at them.
Yeah.
That's why we ended up, as the war progressed, we kind of eased out of that whole system. So blue was Yankee, gray was more or less butternut, gray was Confederate. And the flags even changed. You'll see the first national flag there, it looked too much like a U.S. flag, so we changed to the second and third national flag. All that's part of our history. Kind of interesting. Come on to this museum and find out about it.
Well, you've got a torpedo over here, and it's not what we think is a torpedo. So we're going to take a look at it.
Here's our torpedo that you were talking about, but
it looks like a barrel with nose cones.
And you got to remember, first of all, that at that time in the 18th century, 19th century warfare, this was referred to as a torpedo. What most people think of now as a torpedo is a self-propelled bomb.
Right, correct.
Sent out by a boat or a submarine, but these really would be called today a mine, an underwater mine. So that's what it is. But it's true, it does look like a barrel with nose cones on it, but it's got, as you'll see, some points where if you make contact, it will explode. And there were several different ways of doing it. They use contact. They also use electrical, primitive electrical devices too.
Similar to like thinking how you do a plunger for dynamite. Similar type of deal, right?
Now this is very important to Donald and I because it brings back family history.
Your family type. Well, tell me about it.
Well, our great-grandfather, who was a private in 38th Mississippi, he told his children, and his children told us that he was in a rifle pit up in the Yazoo Canal, on the Yazoo River, which is now the Yazoo Canal, when they sunk the Yankee gunboat. And we were, really? Is that true? You know, so that was our great-grandfather.
And at that time, it kind of felt more like folklore as a fact.
Gotcha. It was family lore. It's part of
family lore.
And every Southern person has some of that information.
Yes, they do.
And that's why this is so important, that we can save that type of information. Now, another thing that I found out from reading in the old Confederate veterans was that up in Yazoo City, north of Vicksburg, there was a African-American slave who was a carpenter, a skilled carpenter, who was putting these things together for the Confederacy.
Incredible.
So it just shows the interconnection and the working together of free and slave in the South during the War for Southern Independence. Interesting that this torpedo, or mine, actually sunk one like this, not this one obviously, sunk the USS Cairo on the Yazoo River, and that's what my great-grandfather was talking about. And the, what was it, about the 1960s, early 1960s, the state of Mississippi went in and raised the CSS Cairo, and they looked, because a lot of the Yankees would say, oh, no, the boiler.
The boiler would have made it.
The Confederates didn't sink.
They wasn't that smart.
No. Well, when they pulled it up, they saw that the explosion was inward, not outward, so it was done by a Confederate mine. And of course, Donald and I, and what did Daddy say?
My daddy almost jumped off the couch and said, well, my granddaddy did sink that Yankee gun.
And see, folks, if you remember when we talked about the Sultana, in the Sultana episode, we talked about how at first they thought a torpedo similar to this sank it, but further investigation found that the boiler blew up on the Sultana, which was an inside-out explosion. The Cairo was sunk by this, means the explosion happened on the outside of the hull, crushed the hull, and it sunk.
And I believe that was the first time a United States military ship was sunk by an underwater mine. And the Confederates did it, just like we had the first submarine.
That's right.
The Yankee gunboat. So many of the things that we did. building the casemate ironclads, and this whole section is dedicated to the Confederate Navy. So a great collection of models showing the many ships that we built. And when the war started, the wood for these ships were still growing trees in the South.
That's right.
I mean,
where was the iron?
The iron was still in the ground to be dug up.
In the South. That's right.
The Ironsides farm. So the South, even though we were a brand new nation with just forming a government, just forming a resistance effort, we were still able to produce really one of the largest navies in the world at that time.
For a bunch of poor boys, they were quite innovative.
Absolutely.
They really were. Now, you mentioned earlier that we have a vest.
Yes, we have a vest.
From my hero.
Our hero, Nathan Bedford Forrest wore, and we believe we have a stain of his blood that was on that vest. If you want to look at it,
yeah, let's take a look.
There is a place, nestled in the rolling farmland of southern Middle Tennessee. A home, constructed in 1837, nearly lost to the ravages of war. Saved by a servant and a Confederate general. A place where families loved and lost. If walls could talk, what stories could be told? If a place, a home, can feel love, loss, pain, surely this is one of those places. Nearby is a more recent structure, and inside are the stories of heroes and heroines, stories of battles won and lost. Stories of sacrifices made by the people of its native soil. A place that will tell the true and complete story of the Southland and the war fought for its freedom. From the causes that led to the conflict to the modern-day struggles to protect Southern history. Historic Elm Springs and the Confederate Museum at Elm Springs are the general headquarters for the Sons of Confederate Veterans. A place where the story of the Southland and its historic struggle is preserved and told. Come and discover your history.
From the pens of the Kennedy twins comes a new literary composition. The renowned authors of The South Was Right and a dozen more publications have become known for their zeal for conservatism and Southern heritage preservation. In their new book, Jefferson Davis, High Road to Emancipation and Constitutional Government, Donnie and Ron Kennedy hold nothing back. They're quick to point out Davis's high road approach to emancipation, while Lincoln chose the low road. Never afraid of controversy and to go against the grain of the politically correct, the Kennedy twins expose how our constitutional republic of sovereign states has been transformed into a deep state of federal government. To get your copy of the book that defends President Davis and the South, go to www.kennedytwins.com. That's www.kennedytwins.com.
Now this is my hero right here.
The hero of many Southerners.
Yes.
Matter of fact, Robert E. Lee, at the end of the war, he was asked what was the most brilliant general the war produced. General Lee said, a man whom I've never met, General Nathan Bedford Forrest.
Wow.
That is high, really telling a lot about General Lee and General Forrest. But what we have here is a vest that was worn by General Forrest.
Wow.
Now, the interesting thing is that there's a blood stain on this vest, and it is believed that this vest was worn by Forrest shortly after, if not during, the Battle of Fallen Timbers in 1862. And there is some blood stains on it, and we believe that to be the stain of General Forrest. So not very many museums have anything like this, and we're really proud here with this museum to have this artifact.
Oh, I love it. And the Battle of Fallen Timbers, for those of you that are trying to play catch up with everything we're talking about today, third day battle, part 3 of the Battle of Shiloh. As the Confederates are falling back to Corinth, it was orders given to Forrest and his men to hold back the Federals, which was under Sherman.
The rear guard of the Confederate Army, basically. Yeah.
And Sherman was on them. He had a full brigade, and Forrest had less than 700 men. By that time, it was about 500 plus men. And so
you got a wonderful job, and that's even General Sherman after the war admitted that the only general that kept him awake at night worrying was Nathan Bedford Forrest.
Oh, I love it.
And that's why so many people in the North hated Forrest and really told a lot of lies about Forrest because he was such a brilliant general. He had probably less than an 8th grade education, and he whipped every West Point general that ever went against him.
I think we need to do a show just on Forrest one time. Now, one of the things we're going to talk about is diversity, and we're going to walk that direction in a moment. But the interesting thing was, as much as some people hate Forrest, he was a man of diversity.
Absolutely, and not only that, he freed more slaves at his own personal expense than Abraham Lincoln.
Yeah.
Amazing story.
All right, let's head this direction.
All right, come on.
Talk about diversity. Now, we're talking about diversity. What I like about the whole place, you cover so many subjects. We talked about Forrest, my hero, and then here is Louis Napoleon Nelson. Nelson Winbush was his ancestor, an SCV member, a black gentleman, lives in Tennessee, West Tennessee.
Well, as we've said before, the South is a rich, diverse culture, and we in the Sons of Confederate Veterans, we are glad and proud of that diversity. Here we have you ever had a teddy bear? Think a black Confederate veteran, Hope Collier. He was responsible for that. Ron, what else did
we've got so many that we don't have time, but quickly, let's look at, here's Patrick Claiborne, who served in the British Army, an Irishman. Of course, he fought his way out of that service, typical Irish. He didn't
yes, he did.
But his family was starving, so he came to the South and became a major general in the Confederate Army. Over here is another one from Kelly's Irish Brigade. So we have different nationalities. Here's Henry Wirtz, who was from Sweden, a Swiss that was. And here we have Ambrose Gonzalez, a Cuban who fought with us. Don, we have some Hispanics as well, don't we?
Right. Well, we have Santos Benavides. We have his group here. There's several. The Hispanic played a key role, especially in the Texas and part of Louisiana area in the defense of the South.
And, you know, the interesting thing is we have Native Americans, Stan Waddy, who, again, he was in command of not only Native Americans, but white troops as well.
That's right.
The same goes for Santos. He did as well. So this shows how the South was a very diverse and a very welcoming and tolerant people.
In closing, let's don't forget we had both Jewish as well as Catholic, Roman Catholics, and Protestants, all part of the Confederate military, all part of the South, and all being respected and celebrated. And the Sons of Confederate Veterans, to this day, we celebrate that great diversity.
Yeah, and that's what it's all about. And we didn't want to do this show to bring grief to anybody. We wanted this to be your relief. This is to give you some relief about American history. Because if you do not know your American history, then we're doomed and destined to repeat our mistakes. To see this type of diversity, most people think of the Southern Army as just a bunch of white men fighting for a grievance that they have for the cause of slavery. That's been what they've been sold for years. That's what's being taught in our schools. But what we're trying to show you is the truth. These are actual individuals that served. And you're talking about Cubans. There was a lady who dressed like a man to be a part of the Confederacy. So women actually fought in the ranks too. And mentioning, I have a lot of people want to argue to say that only they were cooks, musicians, and drove wagons. Colt Collier when he went out, Holt Collier, when he went out, he carried weapons.
He was a sharpshooter.
He was a sharpshooter. The 7th Tennessee, at the Battle of Chickamauga, Longstreet makes a comment about Forrest troops. He didn't know that it wasn't infantry. And he said, "Who are those well-trained men on the field?" And he said, "Well, that's Forrest dismounted cavalry. That's the 7th Tennessee." And I can proudly say that my ancestors were part of the 7th Tennessee. And so was Lewis, Nelson, Napoleon.
And let's don't forget, when people talk about, well, they were just musicians, they were
right.
The drummer was very important in,
yes.
in 19th century Napoleonic tactics, and they were just as much at harm's way as the regular soldiers.
Became casualties quite often.
But remember this, the Confederate Congress passed a law that says musicians, regardless of what color, would be paid the exact same thing all across. So it wasn't any disparity between them.
Something that the Yankee Army didn't do for a long time after the war.
And in some time, and after the war, speaking of pensions, they also received pensions.
Right. Oh, yeah.
Some of the blacks that served for the Confederacy, they received pensions. Now, we had one other spot we wanted to go to. I think we're going to talk about Reconstruction.
Reconstruction? We got some carpetbaggers over here.
Well,
carpetbags anyway.
Yes, let's go back that direction.
All right, you want to see some real carpetbags?
Yes, I do.
Well, here are two actual carpetbags that was used by the Yankee carpetbaggers when they came down to take advantage of the conquered South, to pilfer the South, and to really to help impoverish the remaining South.
Well, in my book, In the Hills of Tennessee, one of the things I talked about, even before the war ends, the Union soldiers are starting to replace Southern merchants, and the first thing to happen was actually the editors of the local newspapers.
Control the information.
That's right. So it happened in Dover after the Battle of Fort Donelson. It happens in Memphis. So there's constant records of how they're replacing it, and they even, if they didn't like a certain merchant that owned a general store or a mercantile, they replaced them too. Absolutely. With their own people before the war ends.
Yeah, and by the time the war ended, they had taken over all the railroads, replaced the boards with, quote, loyal boards. It was really an attempt to punish the South with poverty. This is a timeline. We begin with Reconstruction, 1866, and go all the way through active Reconstruction, then passive Reconstruction, which was that sort of time between 1877 and really 1990, when basically the North-South had a bargain to tolerate each other. But after that, the woke movement began, the politically correct movement began, and we see now that the war continues against the South.
So that's the reason for the museum more than anything, brothers. It's to tell the story that's being lost, because the rewriting of history, I see it take place every day. I mentioned to you last night at supper time that I went to the University of Tennessee at Martin and spoke there, and when I spoke, I watched the professor at the back of the room, and as I'd say things, he would just kind of duck down. And then at the end I said, "Am I speaking the truth?" And he sadly nodded yes. And I said, "But you can't teach this." And he said, "No, it doesn't fit our curriculum."
But you know what? The sons of Confederate veterans in this museum, we can and will tell the truth.
Well, I'll tell you what, I've had an exciting day with the Kennedy twins. Ron, Donnie.
Yes, sir.
Bless you, brothers, for helping to tell the truth about American history and keeping our heritage alive.
Thank you,
Thank
sir.
you.
We'll be right back on History Highway.
When my mother was in college, she danced with Confederate veterans. To me, it wasn't that far away. You know, my father knew this. My mother knew this. Almost 50 years ago, I joined the Sons of Confederate Veterans. In those days, we weren't concerned about saving monuments or any of those things. That wasn't necessary. In fact, none of us had any remote idea that it would ever come up, or we would have done something then. We can't just sit there and react. We have to be proactive.
The Sons of Confederate Veterans is the direct heir of the United Confederate Veterans. and the oldest hereditary organization for male descendants of Confederate soldiers. Organized at Richmond, Virginia in 1896, the SCV continues to serve as a historical, patriotic, and non-political organization dedicated to ensuring that a true history of the 1861 to 1865 period is preserved. Membership in the SCV is open to all male descendants of any veteran who served honorably in the Confederate Armed Forces.
You fought all the way, Johnny Reb, Johnny Reb. You fought all the way, Johnny Reb. I saw you a marching with a Robert E. Lee. You held your head up high, trying to win the victory. You fought for your folks, but you didn't die in vain. Even though you lost to speak highly of your name. You fought all the way, Johnny Reb, Johnny Reb. You fought all the way, Johnny Reb. I heard your teeth chatter from the cold outside. Saw the bullets open up the wounds in your side. I saw the young boys as they began to fall, with tears in your eyes, cause you couldn't help them all. You fought all the way, Johnny Reb, Johnny Reb. You fought all the way, Johnny Reb. I saw General Lee raise a saber in his hand, heard the cannons roar as you made your last stand. You marched in the battle with the gray and the red. The cannon smoke glittered, took days to count the dead. You fought all the way, Johnny Reb, Johnny Reb. You fought all the way, Johnny Reb. When all the state heard the news about your fall, folks thought he'd call for a great victory ball. But he asked the band to play the song Dixie. You, Johnny Reb, and all that you believe. You fought all the way, Johnny Reb, Johnny Reb. You fought all the way, Johnny Reb. Yeah, you fought all the way, Johnny Reb, Johnny Reb. Fought all the way, Johnny Reb. Yeah, you fought all the way, Johnny Reb, Johnny Reb. 'Cause you fought all the way, Johnny Reb. To episode, 'cause they all know I got a million stories to tell. If I'm no dinosaur, it's cool to explore. What makes a country great and put the crack in the Liberty Bell. So take a ride down the history highway. We're headed back to the days of old. So take a ride down the history highway. I got the pedal to the metal and I'm letting this Chevy roll. I got the pedal to the metal and I'm letting